I was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin, a town most people have heard of for reasons other than science, during the war, but of course I didn't know about it at the time. My father was a plumbing and heating contractor. My mother, what we call a hausfrau now, but she had worked in a very important job as secretary to the president of one of the paper mills in Green Bay. So we had some intellectual interest around our house. I was interested in books at an early age. I remember in grade school going to the public library after school and trying to read the entire encyclopedia. I think I got as far as the G's and realized that was a stupid endeavor. My parents gave me a chemistry set somewhere at that stage, which was one of these large ones with things in it that you don't get in chemistry sets nowadays. And I got interested in chemistry. I went to the library, and the only book I could find that I could begin to understand was one about inorganic qualitative analysis. So I started wanting all these obscure chemicals. My father actually had some business in Milwaukee. He would go and find these things, and they would sell them to anybody in those days. So I did not blow things up or make sulfur bombs, but I learned some chemistry. I was interested in ham radio. Not so much to make contacts, but to build things, very elaborate tube sets. And music, yes, I became interested in music at a fairly early age. My mother wanted me to take piano lessons like any kid in those days. I started with my aunt, my father's sister, who was very interested in music. And unlike other kids, I actually liked it. I got my interest in Chopin at that time and tried to play all of his works, and so forth and so on. I think there wasn't too much in terms of thinking about a science career at all. It was just an ordinary, town. I went to high school there. We had some science courses, but no labs. I was more interested in math at that time and foreign languages. I took German because my family had come from Germany a long time ago. And I assumed I would go into my father's business, but he said, no, that's crazy, you don't want to do that. And I had an advisor in high school who said, well, you ought to go to Caltech or MIT. And I did get into both of them. I chose Caltech only for the reason that it was smaller. I didn't know anything about anything then. And I went out there with the idea that I wanted to be a physicist. Those were the times when the Sputnik had been in the sky, the Soviets had their bomb, and so also I was interested in what was going on over in Russia, the Soviet Union. I took Russian at Caltech. I took some physics courses, and there I learned that I was not cut out to be a physicist. I was a sophomore the year that Richard Feynman gave his famous freshman lectures. Some of us would go sit in the back of the room and listen to him, and I have to say they were marvelous lectures, but somehow they were a little too obscure for me. And my own professor at that time was a man named Jerry Neugebauer, who had come over from Germany. He had a terrible accent. He was hard to understand and totally put me off on physics. But meanwhile, over in chemistry, my advisor was a man named Robert Corey. At Caltech, every freshman was assigned completely at random a faculty advisor, and mine was Corey. He's well known, if you know anything about protein chemistry, as the co-inventor with Linus Pauling of the Pauling-Corey alpha helix. So I went to his office the first time, and there on the shelves and on his desk were these models of protein structure. And I had just seen the work on myoglobin and hemoglobin that was coming out at that time, and so I decided to become a protein crystallographer. I studied crystallography with a man named Richard Marsh, who just passed away this year, in fact. He was a terrific teacher. He insisted that people really learn the basics, and I will recall, well, first of all, I did a structure as a summer research project. He went to a cabinet where he had a bunch of little vials. He picked one out at random. It happened to be, as I remember, 5-ethyl-6-methyl uracil, related to the uracil that's in DNA, RNA, but nobody was interested in it, but I took data on film, and then came time to do the first Fourier series. In those days, people were just starting to use computers. He actually had me sit down with a Monroe calculator for 2 weeks using a set of trigonometry tables that were designed just for this purpose, called Beaver's Lipson strips. and I made my first Fourier series. What I learned from that exercise was something that's been with me all my life, which was the idea that when you sit down to, well, I started to say when you start trying to put that on a computer, when you sit down to put something on a computer, it really, really pays to know all the details of what the calculation entails and how to get it exactly right, and particularly how to take advantage of aspects of the problem that simplify things. In the case of Fourier series, it was symmetry. You know, if you knew that you had a sine and a cosine that were 180 degrees apart, they would add up to 0, and you didn't need to add them up, and that could cut the time in half for some of these calculations. So I took that with me. I wanted to say a little bit about computing because it was just getting started at that time. I can recall some things that seem very strange today. The first computer I worked with had its memory on a magnetic drum, which rotated at a certain high speed. It was all run with vacuum tubes. And every instruction that you programmed on that computer, believe it or not, had the address of where to get the next instruction off the drum. Because multiplication, for example, took longer than addition. So if you put the next instruction a little farther around the drum, it would come to the read head when the multiplication was finished. And those were the kind of things, again, that taught me to always be super careful about what took time in a computation. Finally, we moved on to this IBM 7094, which had the huge memory space of a 15-bit address or 32,000 numbers. You know, now we have easily 32 gigs, so you know, close to 1 million times more memory than that machine had. And we programmed in machine language, or what was called assembler language. And I worked with 2 graduate students that Marsh had that I've been in contact. One of them I've been in contact with ever since, David Duchamp and Carlo Gramaccioli, who went to Italy and became famous there. And I learned a lot